Okay, U.S. history. Welcome back, guys. We are on week 6, day 1 of distance learning. Um, some of you guys who probably aren't listening to this right now finished up all your assignments last Friday. A couple of us are still working though. So, in this and my other classes, I'm going to continue giving lessons for the rest of the school year. And if you're one of my students that is still working, then good job logging in and watching this lesson. As mentioned last Thursday, today we're going to talk about the important events, a lot of the important events um, that took place in United States history during the 1990s. A terrific decade for many reasons. Braves won the World Series. The Olympics were in Atlanta. Your teacher was a Georgia Little League state champion. Really just triumphs all over the place, but not all triumphs. So we're going to look at Bill Clinton's presidency, and we're going to look at the 90s through that lens. And then it's a fairly short PowerPoint. And then after that, we're going to watch the Clinton years U.S. history crash course. So without further ado, let's get going. So what were the important events? He served throughout most of the 90s. Of course, George W. Bush, who had served as Reagan's vice president, was a one-term president before Bill Clinton. But in 1992, Slick Willie was elected president of the United States. Before that, though, look how young he is. At the age of 32, he was elected governor of Arkansas. That is 2 years younger than me. As governor, he pushed for middle class tax cuts and a national health care system. Clinton also benefited throughout his political career from his wife, Hillary Clinton. Hillary Rodham Clinton, who that's a name that I'm sure rings a bell to everybody because she has previously been Secretary of State, and she had an unsuccessful run for president in this most recent, in the 2016 presidential election. So she's been a political player both behind the scenes and in the public eye since the late 1970s. Hmm. To be his running mate for president, Clinton chose Al Gore. Al Gore was a senator from Tennessee, said this was a Southern ticket, two Southern Democrats. Of course, Bill Clinton from Arkansas, Al Gore from Tennessee. And there were three candidates in this race: the incumbent president, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and an eccentric fellow, an oil tycoon named Ross Perot. Clinton sought to portray himself as protector of the middle class. we're going to watch a little bit of their debate.
Welcome to the first of three debates among the major candidates for President of the United States.
And we're going to talk, let me pause it real quick. We're going to talk about the impact of television. But when you watch this debate, look at the way that Clinton is able to sort of exude a certain charisma on television that his opponents don't necessarily possess. I mean, the fact that by the 1980s, really before that, by the 1970s, television and your media savvy is already playing a big role in politics. But let's check this out.
It's sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. The candidates are independent candidate Ross Perot, Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee, and President George Bush, the Republican nominee. I am Jim Lara of the McNeil-Lara NewsHour on PBS, and I will be the moderator. What separates each of you from the other? Mr. Perot, what do you believe tonight is the single most important separating issue of this campaign?
I think the principal issue that separates me is that 5.5 million people came together on their own and put me on the ballot. I was not put on the ballot by either of the two parties. I was not put on the ballot by any PAC money, by any foreign lobbyist money, by any special interest money. This is a movement that came from the people. This is the way the framers of the Constitution intended our government to be, a government that comes from the people. Over time, we have developed a government that comes at the people, that comes from the top down, where the people are more or less treated as objects to be programmed during the campaign with commercials and media events and fear messages and personal attacks and things of that nature. The thing that separates my candidacy and makes it unique is that this came from millions of people in 50 states all over this country who wanted a candidate that worked and belonged to nobody but them. I go into this race as their servant, and I belong to them. So this comes from the people.
Governor Clinton, 1 minute response.
The most important distinction in this campaign is that I represent real hope for change, a departure from trickle-down economics, a departure from tax and spend economics to invest and grow. But before I can do that, I must challenge the American people.
Did you guys catch what he said? Trickle-down economics, that concept that was championed by Reagan and other conservatives, which is that tax breaks and things that benefit the richer Americans, that they'll then use that money, that extra money they have, to expand business, etc., and that everybody else will benefit. Liberals have long been critical of that concept.
People to change, and they must decide. Tonight I say to the president, Mr. Bush, for 12 years you've had it your way, you've had your chance, and it didn't work. It's time to change. I want to bring that change to the American people, but we must all decide first we have the courage to change for hope and a better tomorrow.
President Bush, 1 minute response.
Well, I think one thing that distinguishes is experience. I think we've dramatically changed the world. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but the changes are mind-boggling for world peace. Kids go to bed at night without the same fear of nuclear war. And change for change's sake isn't enough. We saw that message in the late 70s. We heard a lot about change, and what happened, that misery index went right through the roof. But my economic program, I think, is the kind of change we want. And the way we're going to get it done is we're going to have a brand new Congress. A lot of them are thrown out because of all the scandals. I'll sit down with them, Democrats and Republicans alike, and work for my agenda for American renewal, which represents real change. But I'd say if you had to separate out, I think it's experience at this level.
Governor Clinton, how do you respond to the president on the question? You have 2 minutes on the question of experience. He says that is what distinguishes him from the other.
Also, it's remarkable how civilized this all is compared to what we saw in the most recent
Two of
debates.
you.
I believe experience counts, but it's not everything. Values, judgment, and the record that I have amassed in my state also should count for something. I've worked hard to create good jobs and to educate people. My state now ranks first in the country in job growth this year, fourth in income growth, fourth in the reduction of poverty, third in overall economic performance, according to a major news magazine. That's because we believe in investing in education and in jobs. And we have to change in this country.
1 minute to respond.
I just thought of another big difference here between me. I don't believe Mr. Perot feels this way, but I know Governor Clinton did because I want to accurately quote him. I think he said that the country is coming apart at the seams. Now, I know that the only way he can win is to make everybody believe the economy is worse than it is. But this country's not coming apart at the seams, for heaven's sakes. We're the United States of America. In spite of the economic problems, we're the most respected economy around the world. Many will trade for it. We've been caught up in a global slowdown. We can do much, much better.
Look at all three of us, decide who you think will do the job, pick that person in November, because believe me, as I've said before, the party's over and it's time for the cleanup crew. And we do have to have change, and people who never take responsibility for anything when it happens on their watch, and people who are in charge.
Your time is
Time
up.
is up.
Time is up.
Or later.
Really fascinating stuff. Take a look back in time. Perot was a Texas billionaire. You heard him say in that debate, I didn't take any PAC money. He was self funded, and he approached it from a business perspective. And he opposed free trade agreements with Mexico and Canada, which is somewhat of a radical concept at the time. Perot is remembered mainly for being just an eccentric, kind of funny little character, but um, he was a semi legitimate third party candidate. And those aren't that common. You can see Clinton won our state, Georgia, Louisiana, Tennessee, but Bush won the rest of the South. He won Florida, Mississippi, Alabama, North and South Carolina, won all of these. You can see it's is a pretty thorough victory. In fact, a very thorough victory for Clinton. Clinton, although some, his opponents wouldn't have, might not have accepted this description, but for a Democrat, he was a centrist who wanted to bring together liberal and conservative ideals, obviously with a liberal tilt. Believed in strong national defense, which that's typically a conservative, something that conservatives put more of an emphasis on. Was a champion of free trade, welfare reform, closer ties with corporation. Clinton's presidency was the longest period of sustained economic growth in United States history. creates the Family Medical Leave Act, which guaranteed most full-time employees 12 weeks unpaid leave for childbirth to recover from serious illness or care for sick family members. Um, this is only in specific types of jobs. If you're working as a waiter somewhere, then they're probably not going to give you that. So this is not every single employee in the United States at this very moment is not guaranteed for these things, but still he was able to get that act passed, raised the minimum wage, made it a little bit more accessible for people from lower socioeconomic situations to go to college. Health insurance was and is an issue. And Hillary Clinton, as First Lady, headed a task force. Her proposals were defeated. This guy, Newt Gingrich, also a Georgia guy, Republican, comes along, and there's a Republican majority in both houses of Congress. So now you've got a Democratic president and a Republican Congress, both houses led by this guy. Here's the Brady Bill, Gun Control Act, named for a presidential aide, James Brady, who was wounded in the 1981 assassination attempt on President Reagan. There was a $30 billion anti-crime bill. Which increased funding for police, banned several kinds of assault weapons. There were moments of domestic violence. The Oklahoma City bombing, of the federal building that killed 168 and wounded more than 800 others by Timothy McVeigh. There's a really cool, I can't remember if it's on Amazon Prime or Netflix, but there's a really good documentary about that if you guys are looking for something to do. And then this one really shaped my childhood. I was 14 when the Columbine high school shooting took place. And unfortunately, school shootings, mass shootings in general, those are words that we hear too often now. But Columbine was the first time it had ever happened at a school. And it really, really shook the world, to say the very least. Shook the country, especially school-aged children. We won't watch this whole thing because it's
School violence
12 minutes long, but we're going to watch a little bit of it.
erupted again today, suddenly and with a vengeance. Columbine High in Littleton, Colorado. It has been a horror.
In 1999, two high school students went on a deadly rampage, and the images seared themselves into the nation's collective memory.
One of the worst school shootings ever. 15 dead bodies still being identified.
An American nightmare that too many schools know too well.
Yet how much of our explanation for that nightmare was right?
The entire country was confident that these two killers were two loner outcasts from the trenchcoat mafia who were targeting jocks in a revenge fantasy. None of that was true.
Misguided perceptions of the Columbine shooting continue to influence us today.
Yes, I am a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun.
On April 20th, 1999, two students culminated months of planning by donning black trench coats and attacking their school. Armed with guns and an arsenal of homemade bombs, they terrorized teachers and peers.
They had a couple of duffel bags at their feet, and we witnessed them pulling out what we assumed to be paintball guns that later on turned out to be something completely different. My secretary comes in and yells that there had been a report of gunfire and bombs exploding. So I ran out of my office, saw a gunman coming towards me. I remember hearing gunfire, and I remember glass breaking behind me. I was laying in broken glass from the window that had gotten shot out. All I could hear was the fire alarms going off. And then the gunshots at a distance.
Okay, has anybody been injured, ma'am? Okay. And the school is in a panic, and I'm in the library. I got guns down under the table, kids. Heads under the table.
We were all crouched under the tables, and we could hear the gunshots getting louder. And a couple times there was a big boom, and the floor would shake.
On the floor, you gotta stay on the floor. Oh God, stay in the line of things. Oh God, the gun is right outside the library door.
They came into the library. Eric leaned under the table and pointed his gun at me. I mean, I was like trembling under there like a little leaf. I saw the shotgun, stared at the shotgun, and all I remember is it seemed like the barrel of the gun was the size of a cannon. As soon as that bullet entered my backpack and actually paralyzed me, shattering my vertebrae, that's when the pain set in. So there was like Eric on my right, and then Dylan was up on my left. And I looked up at Dylan, and I said, "Hey, Dylan." And he said, "Hey, man." And I said, "What are you doing?" And it still like chills me how he was just like, killing people.
The killers fatally shot 12 students and a teacher in less than 20 minutes. Then they turned the guns on themselves.
12 kids died on my watch, along with the teacher. In our lives, you're not supposed to bury your kids. And they were all my kids.
Before the world had fully grasped what had happened inside the school, there was a scramble to make sense of it.
We're getting coverage from 4 stations in the Denver area of a shooting at a high school.
A still developing situation, and one that looks like it's not going to be over anytime soon.
Horrors like Columbine terrify us, and we need an explanation. So even if we don't have an answer, we find one. And we find it really too fast.
2 witnesses that we talked to on the telephone described them as members of the trench coat mafia. These are kids they claim routinely dress in black trench coats.
Kids were watching this on TV. And also, it was the early days of cell phones. If they weren't seeing it, their friends were watching it on TV, calling them on their cell phones, and letting them know.
They were saying that they wanted to do this for their revenge for the school, I guess, because, I mean, they're such an outcast at our school.
It was this little round and round feedback chamber. So when a kid goes on TV and says, "Oh yeah, they were outcasts," another kid who doesn't really know the killers well or at all thinks, oh, they're outcasts. Oh, I didn't realize that. Then when he's interviewed, he says they're outcasts. So you're contaminating the witness pool like that.
And speculation about a black-coated mafia and its supposed grievances ran wild.
A gang that apparently hated athletes.
It was all because people were mean to him last year.
The Trenchcoat Mafia is more than just black clothes. These boys were dangerously strange.
In a yearbook photo of some group members that was broadcast nationwide, neither gunman appeared. One member of the Trenchcoat Mafia, John Savage, said there was a good reason for their absence.
Eric and Dylan were not at all a part of the things that we did as a group. They didn't hang out with us. They weren't Trenchcoat Mafia at all.
And he says the media's description of him and his friends had little basis in fact.
The Trenchcoat Mafia was like we were video game nerds. We like, sit around the table and, play Dungeons and Dragons, which is just about the least dangerous thing you could do.
It was a group of friends that had similar interests. Some kids referred to them as the Trenchcoat Mafia, but it was not that it was an organized club.
But the explanation about outcast loners seeking revenge against bullies had the dual advantage of being both dramatic and familiar.
What happened here at Middleton is a grotesque distortion of high school fears and rivalries involving cliques, the in-groups and out-groups that are a part of teen life in America.
Author Dave Cullen spent nearly 10 years on his account of Columbine, researching police records, the killers' diaries, and their lives at the school. He said the boys had busy social lives and didn't seem motivated by bullying.
There was lots of bullying at Columbine. It was a high school in America. Did it have anything to do with driving these two boys to murder? I cannot find any evidence of that.
The killers directed their hostility toward the whole student population, placing propane bombs set to go off in the cafeteria at lunchtime. But the devices failed to detonate as planned.
Columbine actually wasn't a successful shooting. It was a failed bombing. How much more indiscriminate can you get? 2 big bombs to kill everyone who happens to be in that part of the building at the start of a lunch.
Cullen describes the killer's motives as a cocktail of malice, self-loathing, and a craving for fame. Over time, they became something like a two-man cult, bent on making their mark on the world in one final act.
It was a murder-suicide for both of them. For Eric, it was primarily a murder. For Dylan, it was primarily suicide. They took the tactics of terrorists, said, we can do the same stuff.
We'll pause that because goes on for 6 more minutes, but that was really a defining moment in the 1990s during the Clinton presidency. Let's keep going. And we're not going to, between the two video clips we saw, we're not going to finish the presidency today, but that's fine because we got time. So 96 rolls around. Well, Mr. Pope was 11. Of course, Clinton was the sitting president. He was the Democratic nominee. The Republican was a man named Bob Dole, a World War II vet and a veteran senator from Kansas. And then Ross Perot had stuck around. One thing Clinton did that, along with the Congress, remember the Republican Congress, was they were able to balance the budget and shrink the deficit. We won't get into too much of the X's and O's of that. You guys will talk about that in economics, or you may have already talked about it in economics, but just know both those things are good. But Clinton's presidency was not without its scandals, and scandals that seemed especially scandalous at the time. To me, it feels like it wasn't that long ago, but it was pretty. The 90s were a while ago, and as a public, we really had a different concept of what was and wasn't a scandal, but these things were quite scandalous. One is the Whitewater scandal, and that's a scandal that went back to Clinton's time in Arkansas. There was some shady dealings with some kind of a real estate project, and that followed Clinton into Washington. That woman to the right there, Paula Jones, filed a sexual harassment case. Also related to Arkansas, which was also thrown out. And then the granddaddy of them all, the Monica Lewinsky case. Clinton got himself in trouble for lying. He had an affair of some kind with this girl, an aide, White House aide, which in itself is certainly not a good thing. It's not moral, but it's not necessarily illegal. What really got him in trouble was when he was asked about it under oath and he lied. Uh, or he, yeah, and he lied about it. So anyway, maybe we'll look more into these tomorrow. Um, and of course, we're covering over a lot of stuff. We have the benefit of doing that since we're not taking our state assessment this year. We get to get a little more leeway in what we talk about. So I think with that, this is as good a place as any to stop for the day. I will talk to you guys tomorrow.